When the phone rang that evening, I almost didn't pick up. The number was familiar but distant, like a shadow from another life. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the green button. It was Melissa. My sister. My older sister, the one who hadn't called in months, maybe longer. The one who always seemed too busy, too far, too unavailable. I hesitated, then finally answered. "Hey Katie," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too sweet. No one had called me Katie in years. Not since before the hospital visits, before the endless nights with Dad's coughing echoing down the hallway, before the final days when I sat by his bed, holding his hand and whispering stories into the silence. I didn't say anything right away. Just listened. She continued, "I was thinking, maybe we could have dinner? Just us. It's been too long. Too long." I wanted to laugh. Or cry. I wasn't sure which. Melissa had been a ghost these past few years, showing up only for birthdays, maybe a holiday if it suited her schedule, always breezing in with expensive perfume and breezy excuses. And then vanishing just as quickly. "I know things have been weird," she went on, "but I think it's time we clear the air. I miss you. I miss us." As if us had meant anything when I was sitting alone in the kitchen trying to get Dad to eat, when I was cleaning his sheets, organizing his pills, listening to his voice crack with pain in the middle of the night. As if us had been anything but a fading memory while I watched him shrink into himself. I told her I'd think about it. And I did. I sat in that same kitchen, quiet now, painfully clean, and stared at the envelope still sitting on the counter. Thick, cream-colored paper with the lawyer's letterhead embossed in black. I had opened it that morning. The words had blurred together the first time I read them. It was only after the second, then third time, that they settled in my mind like a weight I couldn't shake. Dad had left everything to me. The house. The land. The small amount of savings he had managed to scrape together, even after the medical bills. It was all mine. Not ours. Not shared. There was a line in the letter that stuck with me, in recognition of the care and sacrifice shown by my daughter Caitlin during my final years. He had remembered. Every late-night drive to the emergency room. Every time I changed his oxygen tank. Every time I sat in the dark with him, holding his hand and pretending I wasn't terrified. He had seen it all. And he had chosen to honor it. And now, suddenly, Melissa wanted dinner. The timing was too precise. Too convenient. I could picture her, pacing in her sleek apartment downtown, her long fingers scrolling through her phone, her mind spinning not about reconciliation but about money. About the house. About what she thought she deserved. I hadn't told her yet. I hadn't told anyone. Just the lawyer. And maybe that was why this invitation felt like a trap wrapped in sugar. A snake disguised as a sister. But still, there was a part of me, the part that remembered childhood sleepovers, whispered secrets and shared tears, that wanted to believe her. That wanted to think maybe, just maybe, she meant it. I called her back the next day. Agreed to dinner. She chose the place, of course. Somewhere trendy and loud, with dim lighting and overpriced cocktails. I wore black. Not to mourn, not exactly, but because it felt like armor. She was already at the table when I arrived, sipping something clear with a lime wedge. Her smile widened when she saw me. "There's my baby sister," she said, standing to hug me. I let her. Her perfume was still too strong. Something floral, expensive, almost cloying. Her arms were thin, her bones sharp. It felt like hugging a memory I didn't trust. We sat. Ordered drinks. She talked. About work, about a recent trip to Miami, about her yoga instructor's divorce. I nodded, sipped, waited. Finally, when the appetizers came, she leaned in. Her voice lowered. "I heard about the house. There was." I didn't flinch. "From who?" She hesitated. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." She looked away, pretending to study the menu again. "A friend mentioned seeing something online. Property records, maybe." Bullshit. I knew exactly who told her. Probably some mutual friend of a friend, someone who liked gossip more than discretion. He tried to soften the blow. "Look, I'm not here to fight. I was surprised. I didn't know Dad changed the will. Because you weren't there." The words came out colder than I expected. She looked at me, stunned. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I wasn't. And I'm sorry." "Were you?" I wanted to ask. "Were you sorry when I called you and begged you to come sit with him and you said you were too busy? Were you sorry when I asked for help paying the medical bills and you said you had your own expenses?" But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded as if her apology meant something. Maybe part of me wished it did. She reached for her glass. Her hands were trembling slightly. "I thought we could talk about it. The house, I mean. Maybe figure something out together." "There's nothing to figure out." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean the will is clear. It's done." The silence between us stretched. Music thumped in the background. Somewhere a couple laughed. But at our table the air was thick. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just keeping it?" "I took care of him, Melissa. For 3 years. Alone." Her mouth twisted, somewhere between a frown and a sneer. "That doesn't mean you get to shut me out." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "Where were you when he forgot how to tie his shoes? When he couldn't remember my name, but still cried when I left the room? Where were you when I sat next to him and watched the life drain out of his eyes?" She had no answer. Just silence. Just guilt. Or maybe anger. I stood up. Threw a few bills on the table. She didn't stop me. Didn't follow me. Just sat there, blinking under the soft light, drowning in the truth she couldn't deny. Outside the night air was cold. But honest. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something close to peace. The next evening I arrived early at Linden and Vine, a restaurant so pristine it felt more like a gallery than a place to eat. Polished marble floors reflected the soft golden light from designer chandeliers, and delicate piano music played somewhere in the background, just loud enough to remind you that you didn't belong unless you could afford to. The air smelled like truffle oil, expensive cologne, and pretense. I had chosen this place on purpose. Public, upscale, full of eyes. If Melissa wanted to play games, I needed a stage where witnesses couldn't be ignored. She was already at the table when I arrived, naturally. She always liked to be first, to set the tone. She wore a dark emerald dress that matched her eyes almost too perfectly, hair curled, makeup immaculate. She looked like a magazine cover, but under the gloss I could see it. The tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers tapped nervously against her wine glass. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You look great," she said as I sat down. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I had gone with something simple. Black trousers, a crisp blouse, no jewelry except for a slim gold ring that used to belong to our mother. I didn't need to dazzle. I just needed to stand my ground. The waiter came and went, taking our orders, bringing wine, pouring it with a flourish. Melissa made small talk. The weather, a new art exhibit she wanted to see, something about a podcast she liked. I answered in short, careful phrases, watching her closely. She was trying too hard to seem relaxed. And then, just as our appetizers arrived, the air shifted. A shadow moved beside the table, and I looked up to see a man standing there. Tall, broad, with a shaved head and a leather jacket that looked completely out of place in the polished dining room. His boots were scuffed, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. "This is Travis," Melissa said, her voice light, casual, as if she were introducing a coworker or a friend. "He's just here to help us talk things through." "Travis. Help." My stomach turned. I looked at him. He nodded once but didn't sit down. "I wasn't told we'd have company," I said, keeping my voice level though my pulse had picked up. Melissa's smile stayed frozen in place. "Don't be dramatic, Caitlin. He's just neutral ground. Like a mediator. A peacekeeper." A peacekeeper in a leather jacket? In a 5-star restaurant? No, that wasn't it. This wasn't mediation. This was intimidation wrapped in civility. "I'm not sure what you think is going to happen," I said slowly, eyes flicking from her to Travis and back. "But if you brought someone here to lean on me, you've miscalculated." Travis remained silent. He didn't need to speak. His presence was message enough. I saw it clearly now. Melissa wasn't trying to reconcile. She was trying to apply pressure, to corner me somewhere safe enough to avoid a scene but private enough to make a threat. Melissa reached for her wine, took a slow sip and placed it back down with deliberate care. "I'm just asking for fairness," she said, voice syrupy. "You can't honestly believe Dad wanted to cut me out completely. You know he was sick. Confused." "He wasn't confused when he signed the will," I said. "He didn't know what he was doing," she snapped, the mask slipping for just a moment. Then just as quickly she softened her voice again. "Caitlin, come on. We're sisters. This doesn't have to get ugly." I glanced again at Travis. He wasn't watching me, not directly, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. He wasn't here to keep the peace. He was here to ensure I didn't walk away without giving Melissa what she wanted. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands on my lap. "So what exactly is the plan? You pressure me in a fancy restaurant and hope I cave? Sign something? Hand over a check?" "No one's pressuring you," Melissa said quickly. "We're just talking." "Then he can leave," I said, nodding toward Travis. Melissa hesitated. That was her tell. She wasn't in control anymore. "I feel safer with him here," she said finally. "Safe from what?" "From me." I let out a dry laugh. "You dragged me out here to manipulate me, Melissa. You're not afraid. You're just losing." Her face tightened. Travis shifted slightly, a subtle move, like he was ready to step forward if needed. The waiter arrived with our entrees, sensing the strange energy but pretending not to. He placed the plates gently, offered a smile and walked away as quickly as he could. Melissa picked up her fork but didn't eat. "This doesn't have to end badly," she said, low and cold now. "You could do the right thing. Split the inheritance. Sell the house. I know people who would pay cash." And there was the real reason. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted liquidation. He wanted a payout and fast. "I'm not selling," I said. Travis tilted his head slightly. "You might want to reconsider. Family's important. Sometimes it's better to find a solution before lawyers get involved." It was the first thing he said all evening. His voice was gravelly, quiet, and deliberate. I turned my full attention to him now. "Are you a lawyer, Travis?" "No." "Then sit down or walk away." He didn't move. Just stared. The silence stretched between us. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table, screen facing up. "This restaurant has cameras. The street outside has cameras. And I've been recording since I sat down." Melissa's expression flickered. Just for a moment. But that was enough. "I didn't come here to be threatened," I said calmly. "I came because, for some insane reason, I thought there might still be something worth salvaging between us. But clearly I was wrong." I stood slowly, pushing the chair back without a sound. "You can keep the appetizers. And the company." Melissa's voice came after me, low and bitter. "You're making a mistake, Caitlin." I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. Outside, the night air cut against my skin like ice. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. From fury. From grief that still hadn't found a place to land. I had walked into that restaurant hoping for honesty. Instead, I found a sister who no longer knew how to be won, and a man who thought his silence was power. But I had more than a recording. I had the truth. And I wasn't giving up a single inch of it. Melissa reached into her handbag with the kind of delicacy that made the gesture feel almost theatrical. Her fingers moved too deliberately, like someone pulling a final card from a rigged deck. I watched her closely, already knowing this wasn't going to be some sentimental token or childhood photo she had dug up to warm my heart. No, this was business now, and she had decided to wear the mask of civility just long enough to deliver the next blow. She unfolded a sheet of paper and slid it across the white tablecloth, lining it up with robotic precision in front of me, her manicured fingernail tapping once on the signature line. "It's just a basic agreement," she said, the edge in her voice coated with an unconvincing sweetness. 50-50. Equal division of the estate. I had my attorney draft it this morning. It's very straightforward. I didn't touch the paper. I didn't even look down at it. My eyes stayed on her face, and for a moment, the noise of the restaurant blurred behind the weight of silence sitting between us. I knew exactly what this was. A performance wrapped in the illusion of fairness. She wasn't asking. She was presenting terms, the way someone offers one last chance before flipping the table. "I'm not signing anything," I said flatly. She blinked, lips parting slightly in surprise, though I could tell she had rehearsed this scenario. Maybe she even thought I'd hesitate, that I'd need time to weigh the consequences. But I didn't. I had already made my decision the night she called, when I first heard that false tone in her voice. Melissa leaned back, arms crossing, the smile gone now. "You're really going to do this? I'm not the one who brought a contract to dinner. You're acting like I'm threatening you." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The threat wasn't coming from her voice anymore. It was coming from him. Travis hadn't spoken again, but his presence had thickened like a storm cloud. He stood just behind Melissa's chair now, arms crossed over his chest, the leather of his jacket creaking softly with the shift of his weight. He wasn't looking at me directly, but everything about his posture screamed tension. Waiting, ready, pressing without words. That was his role. Not to talk. To loom. I let the silence stretch a few seconds longer, then I pushed the paper gently back across the table. I didn't crumple it or tear it. That would have been too dramatic, too emotional. Instead, I returned it the way you return a menu you're not ordering from. "No," I said again, clearly, confidently, like a final answer. Melissa's expression tightened, and I saw something flicker in her, something she hadn't shown yet. Frustration, yes, but also disbelief. Like she genuinely thought I'd cave. Like she thought I was still the little sister who used to follow her around the yard, copying her outfits, waiting for her approval. I wasn't that girl anymore. I worked logistics at Evermont, a construction supply company that handled everything from concrete scheduling to structural steel distribution. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was demanding. I negotiated with site managers who shouted over diesel engines, argued with suppliers who tried to cut corners, and dealt with truck drivers who'd park in the middle of a lot just to prove a point. Conflict wasn't new to me. Pressure wasn't new to me. And men like Travis? I'd dealt with their kind more times than I could count. Posturing, silent types who thought presence equaled power. Travis took a slow step forward, just one. Not close enough to be obvious but close enough to send a message. My eyes flicked to him and I let my gaze linger. Not with fear but with the calm, sharp confidence I'd used 100 times on job sites when someone tried to muscle their way through a disagreement. "If you're trying to scare me," I said, turning my voice just loud enough for the nearby table to hear, "you'll need to do better than leather jackets and awkward silences." Travis's jaw flexed but he didn't say a word. Melissa shot him a warning glance. She hadn't wanted it to escalate. "Not here. Not publicly." "Caitlin," she said, trying to reclaim her tone, smoothing it out like a wrinkle in silk, "this is going to end up in court if we don't resolve it now. And once it's in court things get ugly. Expensive. So. No one wants that." "I'm not afraid of court," I replied, still calm. "I have Dad's signed will. I have every legal document I need. The only thing that's ugly is this little stunt." Melissa's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the tablecloth. She was losing control of the moment and she knew it. Her voice dropped, colder now. "Do you really want to drag this out for years? Spend your life fighting your own sister? I already spent 3 years caring for our father alone. That was the fight. This is nothing." Her face flushed then, not with anger but with something deeper. Maybe resentment. Maybe the kind of guilt she refused to admit was even there. I saw it pass across her features like a shadow. She stood up abruptly, snatched the paper off the table, folded it with a sharp snap of the crease. "Fine. Keep the damn house. You want it so bad, enjoy the termites and the cracked tiles and the medical bed in the living room." Travis stepped back slightly as if released from invisible strings. Melissa didn't look at me again. She turned on her heel, heels clicking against the polished floor as she stormed toward the exit. Travis followed, silent, a few paces behind her, and I watched as the doors swung closed behind them, cutting off the last echoes of their failed power play. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had barely touched my food. My hands were steady, my mind clear. They had come to shake me, but I had already been through worse. What they didn't understand, what they never would, was that real strength doesn't come from control or silence or contracts slid across a table. It comes from surviving, from choosing to show up every day when no one else will. From standing alone again and again and still refusing to fall. And I wasn't falling. I didn't sit back down after Melissa stormed out. Instead, I stood there for a few seconds, steadying my breath, replaying every word in my head. But then something stopped me, a shift in movement. I glanced toward the door and saw that Travis hadn't followed her all the way out. He was standing just by the entrance, halfway between leaving and staying, as if unsure what to do next. His posture had changed. Less rigid, more unsettled. That silence he carried with such confidence now seemed heavier, as though it was loaded with questions he didn't know how to ask. I took a step toward him. He didn't move. "Hey," I said quietly but firmly. "Can I ask you something?" He looked at me and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not aggression, not threat. Something closer to confusion. Wariness. I realized then he was trying to read me, trying to measure if what I'd said at the table was just posturing or something real. "Do you even know what this is about?" I asked, not waiting for permission. "Do you know what she's dragged you into?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight and I could see the muscle flex in the side of his neck as he worked through something internally. "She said you're just here to help," I continued. "To keep the peace. But if that were true, she wouldn't have needed to lie to you about what's really going on." His brow furrowed slightly. "She told you her father died, right?" I went on. "That her little sister is trying to screw her out of a fair share of the inheritance?" His eyes flicked away from mine for a second and that was enough. The seed of doubt had been planted. I stepped closer, my voice calm but relentless now. "Did she also tell you she hadn't seen our father more than 3 times in 3 years? That while she was out taking vacations and shopping for handbags, I was bathing him, feeding him, taking him to appointments, paying bills with money I didn't have?" Still no answer, but his body language changed. His shoulders dropped slightly, like the weight of this new truth was starting to press down. "Did she mention the will?" I asked, softer now. "The one Dad signed in front of 2 witnesses, reviewed by a lawyer, notarized and filed properly? Did she tell you that it names me, and only me, as the beneficiary, because he wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of after everything I did for him?" Melissa reappeared in the doorway, her face sharp with irritation. "Caitlin, this is ridiculous." I didn't even look at her. My eyes stayed on Travis. I could see the anger flicker behind his blank expression now, not at me, not anymore, but directed somewhere else, somewhere closer to where she stood. "She told you she just wanted fairness," I said, quieter now, but every word like a weight hitting the floor. "But she didn't tell you she's already consulted 2 different attorneys who both told her she has no legal claim. And that this bringing you here, showing up with a fake deal, is her last desperate shot. Melissa stepped forward, her voice tight and defensive. This is none of your business, Travis. We talked about this. You said you'd back me up. He finally looked at her and I saw it, the crack. The beginning of a fracture in whatever loyalty she thought she had secured. His eyes narrowed and there was something deeply unsettled in the way he looked at her now. You told me your dad cut you out because he was manipulated, he said, his voice low and flat. You said she forged something. That she tricked him. She did. Melissa said, her voice rising. You weren't there. You didn't see how. Because you didn't want me to see anything, he cut her off sharply. Then he turned back to me. Is it true? About the will. I can call my lawyer right now, I said, pulling my phone slowly from my bag. He's still in the office. He'll confirm it in 30 seconds. Travis stared at the phone and then at me, and that was the moment. The switch. He exhaled through his nose and muttered under his breath, Jesus Christ. He backed away a step, his expression darkening, not with confusion now, but with a slow boiling kind of rage that had nothing to do with me. He turned his eyes to Melissa, who suddenly looked smaller, brittle beneath the high ceilings and designer lights. You dragged me into this, he said, voice low and shaking. You told me I was helping you get justice. That she scammed you. You never said she was the one who took care of him. You never said he gave her everything willingly. You don't understand, Melissa started, but he raised a hand, silencing her with a gesture that was more disgust than control. I'm done, he said. Then louder, to both of us, I don't do this kind of shit. You lied to me. With that he turned and walked out, not looking back. The sound of the door closing behind him was sharper than it should have been, final in a way that filled the space he left with something like shock. Melissa stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway, her hands clenched by her sides, chest rising and falling too fast. I slipped my phone back into my bag without a word. She turned toward me, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, anything, to salvage what little dignity she had left. But I was already walking away. She played her hand and it failed. Not because I had yelled or threatened, but because the truth, simple, quiet, steady, had finally spoken louder than her desperation. Melissa stood there like a statue, cracking at the surface. But the moment Travis disappeared through the door, the silence collapsed. Her hands trembled at her sides, then clenched into fists as her face twisted with fury. Her voice, when it came, was nothing like the slick, composed tone she used at the start of the evening. This was raw, wild, shrill. You think this is over? She shouted, loud enough for several heads to turn. You think you've won? You don't know what you've started. I didn't flinch. I didn't answer. I simply watched her unravel in the middle of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, surrounded by people in tailored suits and evening dresses pretending not to stare. Her heels dug into the floor as she stepped toward me, voice trembling not from grief, but from rage and disbelief. You're going to regret this, Caitlin, she hissed. You think you're so smart, so perfect, playing the little caretaker, acting like a saint. But people like you always get what's coming. I almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. Because despite her fury, despite the way her eyes burned with resentment, I saw it clearly now. The desperation she'd been trying to dress up as righteousness, the fear buried beneath her threats. She had run out of cards and all she had left was noise. I'm not afraid of you, Melissa, I said quietly, but each word struck like glass. And you should stop making threats in public. It's sloppy. Even for you. She froze for a beat, jaw tightening, breath shallow. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out, nearly knocking over a server with a tray of empty glasses. The door closed behind her with the same brutal finality as Travis's departure, but colder. He had left with disgust. She had left with nothing. I stood still for a moment longer, letting the tension bleed out of my muscles. My phone buzzed softly in my bag, a reminder of what came next. Something that lifted the weight I'd been carrying all evening. Alexander. I left the restaurant without another word, stepping into the sharp December air, letting it clear the last trace of Melissa's voice from my mind. The city lights blurred slightly in the windshield as I drove, not from tears but from the quiet weight of everything that had happened. I felt tired but not drained. Heavy but grounded. 20 minutes later, I was sliding into the passenger seat of Alexander's car. He leaned over to kiss me lightly on the cheek, his familiar scent, clean, warm, and faintly spiced, pulling me instantly into calm. The night around us felt completely different from the one I had just left. Here there was stillness. Space to breathe. You look like you've been through a war, he said gently, starting the engine. I replied, managing a small smile. But I'm here. He drove us to a quiet spot on the riverfront, away from the noise of downtown. The city glowed in the distance, reflected in the black water. We sat there for a moment, the silence between us not awkward but full of weight, and I knew I needed to say everything. So I did. I told him everything from the beginning. The call from Melissa, the fake reconciliation dinner, the papers, the threats. I explained Travis's role, how it had all unraveled, and how in the end she had no idea that the man she tried to use as her weapon was connected to me all along. When I mentioned Travis's name, Alexander sat up straighter. His brow furrowed, not in confusion but in recognition. "Wait," he said slowly. "Travis? Big guy, shaved head, leather jacket? Works part-time security for some private contractors." "Yes," I said, watching his face carefully. He exhaled sharply and let out a low whistle. "He's one of our freelance guys. I've used him for 2 projects. Not someone I keep on payroll, but we've crossed paths a few times." And that was it. The final puzzle piece. Melissa had found someone with a reputation, someone who looked dangerous enough to be useful. But she didn't know the whole picture. She didn't know that the man she sent to intimidate me had unknowingly walked into a room where I already had leverage. Not just legal but personal. Travis wasn't Alexander's friend, not in any deep way, but he respected him. That was enough. That connection had cracked Melissa's plan open from the inside without her even knowing. I laughed softly, not from humor but from the absurd symmetry of it all. "She has no idea," I said. "She sent him to pressure me, and the whole time he was answering to someone I trust more than anyone." Alexander looked at me, his eyes soft but steady. "I would have never let anything happen to you. Even if I hadn't known Travis. Even if none of this had connected." "I know," I said. And I meant it. The weight of the evening finally began to lift, not because it had resolved everything, but because I had made it through, clear-eyed, unshaken, and more certain than ever of what I stood for. Melissa had tried to claw her way into a legacy she hadn't earned. She had tried to manipulate, threaten, and corner me. But she hadn't realized one thing. I wasn't standing alone anymore. And I never really had been. That night, sitting by the water, I let the cold air wrap around me, and for the first time in weeks I felt warm. Alexander's face changed the moment I finished speaking. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no shouting, no theatrics, but something in his expression hardened. His jaw tensed, the line of his mouth drawn tight, and his eyes darkened in a way I had never seen before. It was the look of a man measuring consequences, already sorting through actions and decisions like someone used to managing fallout, not feelings. The stillness between us stretched, but it wasn't the same as before. It was electric, heavy with something unspoken and dangerous. "She used my man," he said finally, his voice low, thick with his accent but perfectly clear. "Without asking. Without knowing who he works for." He looked out across the river for a long moment, his fingers tapping once against the steering wheel. Then he turned back to me, eyes locked on mine. "Travis is finished. Done. He'll never work with me again. I don't care if it was for one evening. He should have known better than to step into this without calling me first. I don't tolerate that kind of mistake." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I watched as he pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his coat, tapped out a quick message with a speed and focus that made it clear this wasn't the first time he had cut someone off. For a second he just stared at the screen, then set the phone face down between us. "She used him like a tool," he said quietly. "But in my world, using the wrong tool without permission comes with a price. He knows this. And she doesn't. That's the problem." I looked at him carefully, trying to read beneath his words. He was calm, but the kind of calm that's sharpened by control, not peace. I knew enough about him already to understand that Alexander wasn't just some charming businessman with expensive taste and old-world manners. He had weight behind him, presence that carried far beyond dinner reservations and whispered conversations in hotel bars. He was respected, feared even, and now that edge was surfacing. "If she tries again," he said, voice now colder, quieter, "I won't let it slide. I don't care that she's your sister. If she comes near you, if she even says your name in the wrong place, I will take care of it myself. And I promise you it will be decisive." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need him to explain. His tone told me everything. This wasn't bravado. This wasn't performative masculinity. This was a man who had drawn a line in the sand, and anything crossing that line would be erased. Not warned. Not threatened. Erased. For a second I just sat there, letting it settle over me. A strange quietness filled my chest. Not fear, not uncertainty. Something heavier but steadier. For the first time in my life I didn't feel like I had to brace myself. I didn't feel alone. Not even slightly. I felt seen. I felt guarded. Protected. The weight of years spent doing everything myself. Navigating Dad's illness, Melissa's manipulations, the quiet daily grind of surviving without help. It had all built something inside me. A wall. Not of stone but of exhaustion. And now, suddenly, there was someone standing in front of that wall, not asking me to lower it, but making it clear that nothing and no one was getting past him unless I allowed it. He reached over and gently took my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles once, like a quiet reassurance. She thought she could touch what belongs to me, he said, softer now. She thought you were alone. But you're not alone anymore. I didn't speak. My throat tightened unexpectedly, not from fear but from the strange, overwhelming relief that someone had finally said it out loud. That someone had taken my side without hesitation, without negotiation, without needing to be convinced. I leaned into the moment, letting the silence say what words couldn't. I had never asked for this kind of protection, never expected it, never even imagined it was something I could have. But sitting there with him, knowing what he was willing to do, not out of control but out of conviction, I realized just how long I had lived on edge, bracing for betrayal, guarding myself against everyone, even family. Alexander didn't promise justice. He didn't offer me kindness in the way people usually do, soft and half-hearted. What he offered was something far rarer, far more terrifying and beautiful at the same time. He offered consequences. And for the first time I truly felt safe. It was just after 9 in the evening when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. The house was quiet. Too quiet, the kind that lets you hear every creak in the floorboards, every distant car, every breath. I had just made tea and was halfway through folding laundry when I heard the sharp chime echo through the hallway. Something in me stilled. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. When I opened the door, Melissa was standing on the porch. But not the version of her I was used to. Not the polished, high-heeled woman who walked into restaurants like she owned them. This Melissa looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her hair was tied back in a messy, uneven knot, her jacket too thin for the December cold, and her eyes wide, red-rimmed, hollow in a way I'd never seen before. Her lipstick was smudged, but she hadn't bothered to fix it. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, breathing too quickly, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to keep from falling apart. "Can I come in?" she asked eventually, her voice so small I barely recognized it. I didn't answer. I stepped aside and let her walk in because part of me, a small, exhausted part, still needed to see where this would go. She stepped into the living room and stood there for a moment like a guest who didn't know the rules. Her eyes moved over the walls, the furniture, the quietness. I said nothing. I waited. Then she turned to me and said, "I don't know what else to do." Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked away, down at her hands, which were shaking. She didn't sit. She didn't ask for water or make some attempt at charm. The usual performance wasn't there. Whatever mask she'd worn before had fallen apart somewhere between that restaurant and now. I folded my arms and stayed by the door. "What do you want, Melissa?" She flinched slightly, like the coldness in my voice caught her by surprise. But she didn't snap back. Didn't argue. Instead she took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm in trouble." I said nothing. "I owe people," she continued. "Real people. The kind you don't say no to. And I thought I could fix it. I thought, if I got part of the inheritance, if I sold the house, paid them off, maybe things would quiet down." She looked up at me, her expression filled with something I couldn't quite place. Shame maybe. Or fear. "But now they're calling," she said. "Showing up. And I don't know what to do. I'm scared." I let the words hang in the air. She was finally telling the truth. Not all of it maybe, but enough to show me what this had really been about all along. Not grief. Not fairness. Not family. Just desperation. She sat down on the edge of the couch like her legs could no longer hold her weight. "I don't have anyone else," she said, barely above a whisper. "I burned every bridge. Everyone who could help is gone. I didn't think it would get this bad." I watched her for a long time. Her shoulders were hunched, her hands pressed between her knees like she was trying to keep them from shaking. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, stripped of everything she used to hold above me. Beauty, confidence, the ability to walk away from hard things without flinching. But now there was no one left to walk away from. Only me. "I know I don't deserve your help," she said quietly. "But I'm begging you. Please. Just enough to buy me time." I wanted to feel something. Anger, pity, sadness. But what I felt was nothing. Just a cold clarity that settled into my chest like a stone. I had given her years of silence, patience, second chances. I had cleaned up after her messes when Dad was still alive. Had shielded him from the truth of how little she showed up, how easily she disappeared. I had taken the weight of it all, and now she wanted me to carry this too. "No," I said. Just one word. Firm. Final. She looked up at me like she hadn't heard me right. "Caitlin, I'm not asking for much." "No," I repeated. "You don't get to come here after everything and ask me to save you. I took care of Dad. I buried him. I stayed when you vanished. And you didn't even show up to say goodbye properly. You only came back when there was money on the table." Her lips trembled. She blinked quickly, swallowing whatever bitterness she might have been about to spit. You don't know what they'll do, she said. This isn't about money anymore. It's about survival. I stepped closer, my voice low but unshaking. Then you should have thought about that before gambling with people like that. Before lying. Before using Travis. Before trying to manipulate me with fake dinners and fake tears. Tears welled in her eyes now, but I didn't move. I didn't reach for her. I couldn't. I'm sorry, she said. I really am. I believe you, I replied. But sorry doesn't mean I owe you anything. Not this time. She sat there a few seconds longer, her face slowly collapsing in on itself as the truth finally landed. There was no deal. No compromise. No one left to rescue her. She stood up slowly, her movements heavy, mechanical. She walked to the door, pausing just before stepping outside. I didn't know how far it had gone, she said, not turning around. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could outsmart it. I didn't answer. She left without another word. I closed the door gently behind her and stood there in the quiet, staring at the lock for a long moment. For the first time in years I felt the air inside the house settle. No tension. No ghosts of old arguments. Just silence. The good kind. I had said no. And I didn't regret it. I called Alexander the morning after Melissa showed up. I hadn't planned to. I'd told myself I would handle it on my own, that I didn't need to drag him into the chaos again, that it was over. But when I woke up, the memory of her voice, her shaking hands, and the look in her eyes clung to me like cold smoke. I needed him to know. Not because I wanted help, not anymore. But because for the first time I felt like there was someone I could tell the truth to without being judged or questioned. When he answered, his voice was calm, almost too calm. I know, he said before I even finished explaining. She came to your house. I heard. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to my ear. How could you know already? I know everything that touches you, he said plainly. She was followed, Caitlin. I wanted to make sure she didn't try anything foolish. There was no emotion in his tone. Just quiet certainty, like this was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't know whether to feel disturbed or relieved, but I stayed silent, listening. I've already handled it, he continued. What does that mean? It means she's safe, he said. And so are you. There was something final in the way he said it. Something I couldn't quite define, and for a moment, I felt a strange chill crawl down my spine. She said she owed dangerous people, I whispered. I didn't ask for details, but it sounded bad. It was, he replied. But it's done now. Her dad is gone. She won't know who cleared it. She'll think the people she feared had a change of heart or that someone else intervened. Let her believe that. I couldn't speak. I just sat there staring at the wall, heart pounding in a slow, disbelieving rhythm. Why? Asked finally. Why would you do that for her? I didn't do it for her, he said. I did it for you. Because I don't want her shadow following you anymore. Because I don't want you looking over your shoulder. I want you to sleep at night without waiting for a knock at the door. I breathed in slowly, my chest tightening with something I didn't expect. Not fear, not confusion. Gratitude, but not the light kind. It was heavy, complicated. No one had ever done something like this for me. Not without conditions. Not without wanting something in return. But Alexander didn't ask for anything. He never even hesitated. She can go live her life however she wants, he said. But there's one rule now. She doesn't come near you again. Not a phone call. Not a message. Not a rumor. And if she does? I asked, not because I doubted him but because I needed to hear it out loud. Then it won't be her debts she needs to worry about. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something dense and immovable. I understood exactly what he meant. And for the first time I didn't try to pull away from it. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt protected. It wasn't about vengeance. Not anymore. It wasn't about punishing Melissa or controlling her life. It was about closing a chapter that had been open too long, one written in guilt, silence, and obligation. Alexander hadn't rescued me. He'd just removed the threat that had lingered behind every memory, every tense interaction, every sleepless night. You're safe now, he said again, softer this time. No one touches what's mine. I closed my eyes and let that sentence settle into my bones. It didn't make me feel owned. It made me feel like I had something I hadn't had in years, ground beneath my feet that wasn't shifting. A voice behind me that wouldn't vanish when things got difficult. For the first time in years I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't calculating how to defend myself or wondering what I'd have to fix next. I could breathe. I could finally breathe. And I knew, this time Melissa wouldn't be back. The first thing I did was pay off my student debt. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No champagne, no shouting, no tears. I just sat at the kitchen table one morning with a cup of coffee, logged into my loan account and entered the final payment. A few keystrokes, a quiet click, and it was done. Years of pressure, guilt, and delay, erased in an instant. I stared at the screen for a long while after the confirmation message appeared, not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to feel the moment settle in my body. For so long, that debt had shaped my choices, hovered in the background of every decision. And now it was gone. I moved slowly after that. I didn't rush to spend or change everything at once. I spoke to a financial advisor, someone calm and honest who helped me sort through the inheritance. I invested a portion, just enough to build a safety net I'd never had before. I kept the house, made small repairs, nothing flashy. I bought a new water heater. Replaced the front door. These quiet improvements felt like reclaiming something, not just the space but the version of myself that had been waiting beneath all the noise to breathe again. And then I took a weekend for myself. I booked a small cabin in Colorado, surrounded by evergreens and quiet. I didn't bring anyone. I didn't answer emails. I hiked through the woods during the day, wrapped in a thick sweater and silence. I stood still in the mornings, drinking coffee on the porch while watching mist rise from the hills. I didn't think about Melissa. I didn't think about lawyers or hospitals or waiting rooms. I let my mind go quiet, and for the first time, it didn't feel like something was missing. When I came back, I started therapy. It had always seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford, both in time and in money. But now I understood that healing wasn't just something that happened on its own. It had to be chosen. Carved out. Practiced. My therapist was kind but direct. She didn't let me hide in the corners of the story. She helped me name the grief I had never given shape to, not just from losing Dad, but from carrying the weight of a family that had always made me feel invisible until they needed something. I told her things I hadn't told anyone. About the years Melissa disappeared, about the resentment I swallowed because I was too tired to fight. About the way I learned to minimize my needs because it was easier than being disappointed. Each week, the sessions peeled back something brittle, something buried, and replaced it with space. It didn't feel like control. It felt like permission. Permission to live without apology. And then there was Alexander. He didn't change overnight. He was already solid in ways I wasn't used to. What changed was how I began to trust that consistency. He didn't try to fix me, didn't offer grand gestures or endless promises. Instead, he gave me something I'd never had in any relationship. Steadiness. If I needed space, he gave it. If I called, he answered. If I was quiet, he waited. If I was honest, he listened, not like someone gathering information to use later, but like someone who genuinely wanted to know how I worked, where I hurt, what mattered to me. He never once asked for more than I could give. And that made me want to give him everything. We spent our time in simple ways. Long drives on Sunday mornings, cooking late into the evening, reading on opposite ends of the couch. I stopped bracing for the moment it would all fall apart. I stopped watching him out of the corner of my eye, waiting for the shift. There was no shift. Just a slow, steady unfolding of trust. He knew what I had been through. And instead of trying to erase it, he stood beside it, helping me carry it when it felt too heavy. There were nights he'd pull me close without saying a word, his hand resting gently against the back of my neck, and I'd realize how much of my life had been spent longing for a gesture that simple, and that safe. Each week, something inside me settled more firmly into place. I stopped checking my phone out of anxiety. I stopped looking at the front door, half expecting someone to knock with bad news. I went to sleep without feeling like I had to prepare for a crisis. I woke up without dread. I began to dream again, not in sleep but in life. About small things. Starting a garden, maybe going back to school part-time, writing the stories I used to scribble down in notebooks when I was younger. I allowed myself to imagine things without immediately dismissing them as impractical. I made plans not out of fear but out of hope. For the first time in years, I was no longer surviving. I was living. And I wasn't doing it alone. The call came just after noon on a Thursday. I was sitting at my desk, sorting through receipts and email threads, half distracted by the warmth of sunlight coming through the window. When her name lit up my phone screen, I froze for a second. Not from fear, not even from surprise, but from something more like recognition. It was the ghost of a reflex I hadn't used in weeks. The old instinct to tense, to prepare for chaos, to soften my voice so she wouldn't explode. But that instinct didn't hold the same power anymore. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Hi," Melissa said. Her voice was low, cautious. I could tell she was trying to sound calm, like someone who'd rehearsed what they were about to say in the mirror. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry." There was a pause, the kind that stretched too long to be comfortable. I said nothing, letting the silence settle between us. It wasn't anger that kept me quiet. It was clarity. The kind that comes only when you finally accept the truth. That some people don't change in the way you need them to. "I mean it," she said, rushing a little now, maybe hearing the weight in my silence. "I know I crossed every line. I know I hurt you. I let things get out of control and I dragged you into it because I thought. I don't know what I thought. That you owed me something. That I could fix things by forcing them. She exhaled shakily and for a second, I heard something close to sincerity. But sincerity had never been her problem. It was the follow-through. I'm leaving, she said. I'm moving to Seattle. A friend of mine has a spare room. I need a clean break and I know you probably don't believe me, but I'm not going to bother you again. I just wanted to say that before I go. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. The trees were bare, the sky pale and still. It felt strange, surreal even, to hear her voice again after all that had passed, like hearing an old song you no longer liked but still knew every word to. I appreciate the apology, I said slowly. But I don't believe words anymore, Melissa. Not yours. I heard the breath catch in her throat. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. He just sat with it. I'm not saying this to punish you, I continued. I'm saying it because I need to be honest with myself. With you. I can't pretend we're still sisters in the way we used to be. I can't carry the weight of everything you did and pretend one phone call makes it go away. I get it, she said after a moment, her voice almost breaking. I don't expect anything from you. I needed you to know. How I do. We were quiet again. But this silence felt different, not charged, not heavy. Just final. I hope Seattle brings you what you're looking for, I added because I meant it. Not with bitterness. Not with spite. Just from a place that had finally let go. Goodbye, Caitlin, she said. Take care of yourself. You too, I said and hung up. I sat there for a long time holding the phone in my lap, listening to the soft hum of the house. There were no tears. No anger. No regret. Just the quiet knowledge that something long overdue had ended. And for once it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like closure. I first heard the rumors from a former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in weeks. The message came out of nowhere. Hey, I heard something weird about your boyfriend. You okay? I stared at the screen for a full minute before I even processed the words. My first instinct was disbelief. Then came the familiar chill of recognition. The kind that crawls over your skin when you know exactly where the rot is coming from even before you see it. Melissa. It didn't take long to confirm. The details were unmistakably hers. Just vague enough to avoid legal trouble, just targeted enough to be personal. She had apparently been telling people that Alexander wasn't just well-connected. He was dangerous. A criminal. A man with a violent past and ties to something she called the Eastern European underground. Her phrasing was absurdly theatrical, almost cinematic, but I knew better than to laugh. Melissa was capable of twisting truth into poison. And she knew exactly how to drop it where it would sting. I called Alexander that night. He picked up after the second ring, his voice warm and calm as always. I didn't even say hello. The words came out in a breathless rush. She's spreading lies. About you. About who you are. She's telling people you're some kind of criminal. There was a pause and then I heard a quiet exhale. Not surprised. Not alarmed. Just a steady patience that told me he'd already heard. I know, he said. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart racing. Why didn't you tell me? Because it doesn't matter, he said gently. The people she's talking to, they don't have the power to hurt me. And the people who do have power, they know who I really am. They won't believe her. I fell silent. Part of me wanted to argue, to demand that we respond, to call her out publicly, burn the lie down before it could take root. But Alexander didn't speak like a man in a panic. He spoke like someone who had lived through this kind of noise before and knew exactly how quickly it vanished when you didn't feed it. She's doing this because she's desperate, he continued. Her last move failed. She lost control. Now she's grasping for whatever scraps of attention or revenge she can find. And lies are all she has left. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temple. I just hate that she keeps trying to pull you into this. She can try, he said simply. But I don't live in her world. I don't answer to gossip. And neither do you. He was right. Deep down I knew that. Melissa's lies were loud but hollow. They didn't hold weight. They clattered around in empty circles, bouncing off people who had already stopped listening to her long ago. Still, I couldn't ignore it completely. Not when it touched someone I cared about. Someone who had done nothing but protect me. What do we do? I asked quietly. We shine light, he said. That's all. The best way to kill a rumor is with facts. With truth. And that's what we did. It wasn't a campaign or a confrontation. It was quiet, surgical, methodical. Alexander made a few calls to the right people. Not threats, not intimidation, just conversations. He explained who he was, what he did, and made sure the people who mattered understood that Melissa's words had no grounding. I spoke with mutual contacts who'd heard the rumors, calmly, directly, correcting the narrative without venom. Every time I did, I saw the same reaction. Confusion, then discomfort, then slow realization. The pieces didn't add up. Melissa had cried wolf too many times. She had burned bridges, exhausted sympathy, and clung to a version of reality that no longer bent in her favor. Within days, the story began to unravel. People stopped repeating it. Some even called me to apologize for giving it air. And Melissa? Her reputation didn't just crack, it collapsed. Not because we fought her, but because she tried to use fire where there was nothing left to burn. Her bitterness had become predictable, her stories transparent. The more she spoke, the less people listened. That was the final shift. Not in her, but in me. For the first time, I wasn't shaken. I wasn't anxious. I didn't feel the need to defend or justify or prepare for the next blow. I stood in the truth, our truth, and let her noise drift past me like wind through glass. Alexander never mentioned it again. He didn't need to. The moment had passed and we had passed through it stronger. Not untouched but unshaken. And just like that, her reach ended. Not because we silenced her, but because she finally had no one left to listen. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I went to the grocery store. The kind of morning where everything felt still, unhurried. Soft light through the car windshield, the parking lot half empty, the aisles calm and orderly. I wasn't even thinking about anything in particular, just picking out fruit, crossing items off the list in my head. It was a peaceful routine I had learned to cherish. The simplicity of choosing avocados, reading labels, moving at my own pace without looking over my shoulder. I was near the produce section holding a carton of blueberries when I heard my name. Caitlin. It was her voice. I didn't need to turn around to recognize it. A little too soft, too hesitant, like someone trying to shrink themselves just enough to avoid causing a scene, but still desperate to be heard. I turned slowly, and there she was. Melissa. Standing between rows of apples and oranges, hair pulled into a messy bun, face pale, eyes already glassy. She looked thinner than I remembered. Worn down. Her posture was hunched in that old way she tried to mask with smiles. Except now there wasn't even a smile. I didn't think I'd see you here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I said nothing. I've been meaning to reach out again, she continued, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. To apologize. Properly. I know I said things that were unfair. About you. About him. I wasn't in a good place. I didn't mean. Stop, I said not loudly, but with enough weight to cut her sentence in half. She blinked. I looked at her, really looked. Not with anger, not with pity, but with absolute clarity. For so long she had played roles, shifted shapes depending on the audience. She had been the wounded sister, the victim, the entitled one, the manipulator, the charmer, the destroyer. Now she stood in front of me stripped of all that, just a woman trying to claw back something already buried. I don't need another apology, I said, keeping my voice steady. I don't want to rehash the past or hear explanations. I've heard all your versions already. I just wanted, she started, her lip trembling. No, I interrupted. I need you to hear something now. She stood still like a child waiting for judgment. Her eyes were wide and wet, her hands clutched together as if holding herself together was the only thing keeping her upright. I don't owe you anything, Melissa, I said slowly and deliberately. Not forgiveness. Not comfort. Not another conversation. Not another ounce of energy. Tears spilled over before I even finished the sentence. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Her breath hitched in her chest as she took a shaky step forward. But we're sisters, she whispered broken. We're all we have left. No, I said unmoved. You had me. For years. And you chose everything else instead. You don't get to claim me now just because no one else will listen to you. She covered her face with her hands as the sobs came harder, louder than she probably meant. A few people nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away, sensing something too personal to witness. I just stood there, grounded in a way I had never felt before. No guilt, no trembling, no regret. I need you to hear this, I said one last time, my voice clear as glass. I don't hate you. But I'm done. I've let go. You don't exist in my life anymore. And that's not cruelty. That's peace. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her shoulders shook violently as she cried into her palms, a quiet spectacle of her own making. And I, for once, felt nothing that bound me to her. No obligation. No memory that could pull me back in. I turned away, gently placed the carton of blueberries in my basket and walked to the next aisle. Behind me, her sobs echoed for a few seconds longer, then faded. I didn't look back. I never planned to start my own company. It wasn't some lifelong dream or vision board fantasy. It came quietly, almost naturally after enough people started asking me why I wasn't doing it already. Years of managing logistics for other people had built something in me. Not just experience but precision, calm under pressure, the ability to see the entire board when everyone else was staring at one late shipment. I knew how to make things move, how to fix problems before anyone realized they existed. And one morning, sitting across from a client who casually asked if I'd ever thought about going out on my own, I realized I didn't have a reason not to. I filed the paperwork 2 weeks later. It started small. Just me, a rented office above a coffee shop, and 2 clients who trusted me enough to take the leap. I worked long hours, learned to read contracts and legalese, made mistakes I caught quickly, and built everything piece by piece. Word spread faster than I expected. Within 6 months I had a team. A year later we outgrew the old office and moved into a proper space. Clean lines, concrete floors, high windows that let the light in. My name was on the door. Not someone else's. There was pride, yes. But more than that, there was stillness. I wasn't chasing anymore. I wasn't proving anything. I was finally building something that didn't require me to shrink. Alexander was there for all of it. Not in the spotlight, not managing, not inserting himself where he didn't belong, but steady and present. He celebrated the wins quietly, brought me coffee during the late nights, reminded me to rest when I forgot. He never asked if I needed help. He simply gave it when it mattered. There was no competition between us, no question of roles. Just partnership. The wedding was exactly how I wanted it. Small, intimate, beautiful in a way that didn't try to impress anyone. A garden tucked behind a friend's estate, soft music, candles as the sun dipped behind the trees. No spectacle. No hundreds of faces I barely knew. Just people we loved, people who knew the road we'd walk to get there. My dress was simple. His suit was dark. When I looked at him as I walked down the aisle, I saw no tension, no fear, only certainty. Only him waiting for me with the same steadiness he always carried. Melissa was not invited. I didn't agonize over the decision. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final letter, no need for an explanation. The distance had already been written long before the invitations were sent. She belonged to another life, one I had let go of piece by piece, truth by truth, until there was nothing left to hold. Standing there, hand in hand with Alexander, I realized something I had never felt at any point in my adult life. There was no one in that space who drained me. No one who twisted guilt into duty, or who saw me only as a reflection of what they wanted to control. For the first time, my entire world felt quiet. And safe. And mine. After the wedding, we stayed up late with friends on the patio, barefoot, laughing, passing glasses of wine and stories around like old songs. There were no formal speeches. No performances. Just love in its most unpretentious form. And when the last guest left and the house had gone still, I curled into bed beside him and felt, deep in my bones, the weight that had once shaped my life had finally dissolved. I had my work, my name on the building, my voice in every decision. I had someone beside me who knew how to stand close without pushing. And I had peace, not the kind you borrow or fight for or chase. The kind you build when you finally stop making space for people who only come to take. This was my life now. And it was mine without apology. It was years later, during a quiet lunch with an old acquaintance, when I heard that Melissa had actually moved to Seattle after all. She had found a job, something stable, unglamorous. She was renting a small apartment, living on a modest salary, apparently staying out of trouble. The person telling me didn't know everything, just that she'd started over. No scandals, no rumors, no new disasters in her wake. Just a quieter version of the woman I used to know. I listened, nodding politely, and when the conversation moved on, I let it go. There was no surge of emotion, no sharp pang in my chest. Just a faint, distant curiosity. The kind you feel when you hear about someone you once loved in a lifetime that doesn't belong to you anymore. For a long time, I thought closure would come with an apology, with some dramatic scene that would finally balance the scale. But it didn't. It came slowly, in the quiet repetition of days lived honestly. In the mornings where I woke up without a knot in my stomach. In the calm of my office where every decision was mine. In Alexander's steady hand resting on my back after long days. Time had folded over the past like soft earth, covering the roots of something that no longer needed to grow. I never reached out to her. I never asked for more details. I didn't want them. I had no need to rewrite the story or find a softer ending. Some chapters aren't meant to be revisited. Some bridges deserve to stay burned, not out of bitterness but out of survival. There is grace in knowing when to close the door and not look back. I had done the hard work. I had crawled out from under the weight of family obligation, rebuilt my voice, claimed a life that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. I had learned how to live with both hands open, not grasping, not defending, just present. Whole. And that, more than anything, was victory. Not revenge. Not proving her wrong. But the deep, unshakable stillness of knowing I didn't need the past to justify my present. My life was mine now. And in it there was no room left for ghosts.